Hey guys, Problematic here. It's been slightly more than the week that I promised, but here we are with the second installment of the Symfony2 tutorial series. I'm actually going to call this part 1.5 instead of part 2 because I think enough has changed in the Symfony2 community that it's worth going back and doing a recap and then breaking into some new ground. So let's go over to the Symfony2 download page. We can see that they've done some great work with Composer and making it a lot easier to use Symfony as a project locally. So if you haven't yet, install Composer at getcomposer.org and then just copy paste this line here into your command line and change path to the name of your project, obviously. I'm going to call mine Symfony2 tutorial. What it'll do is go get the project and then install the dependencies remotely, and it'll pull them down and get everything ready to go for you, and then run some post-install hooks to warm up your cache and things like that. As you can see, this is a pretty quick process. The longest part is cloning some Git repositories, but all in all, it should take less than a minute depending on your internet connection. Here we go. Clears the cache, gets everything ready to go. Now, I'm using PHP 5.4, and it offers a great new feature of a built-in web server, and Symfony leverages that now. So I'm going to go ahead and run PHP app console server:run. What I forgot to do is change directories into my project directory. So PHP app console server run. It's going to start the server on localhost 8000 by default. So let's hop over there, and perfect. We're going to want to take a minute to configure everything. I am going to pause the video while I do this so that you don't get my username and password and all that. But I will say that in the time that I've been away, I've become a big fan of Postgres. If you're on Mac, you can use the Postgres app from the guys at Heroku. It's just postgresapp.com. Check it out. I'll be back in just a second. And I'm back. The steps that you missed were generating a key to use for sessions and things like that, and then a confirmation showing everything that it put into your config.yaml. We now have all the defaults. We have the tour, the configure that you just used, and then the demo that kind of showcases everything. What I want to do is clean this up and take out all of the installed Acme demo bundle stuff. So let's go over to the command line. I am going to open that up. I use Sublime Text 2. You can use whatever editor you'd like. I'm going to open it up and look under the source. So you can see there's Acme. I'm going to delete that. And then that's not all we have to do. We have to remove it from the app kernel. You can see down here in the dev and test environments, it tries to leverage that bundle, so we'll get rid of it there. And then in config, routing dev, and then pretty much everything, these top three, all can go. So let's save both of those files out, refresh, we get a 404, so we'll go to appdev.php, and once again, there's no route found for get / because we just took it out. So what I want to do now is fire up a controller and a basic CRUD for the future of our application. What we're going to do is a to-do application where you can write notes to yourself, pick up the milk or feed the dog or whatever. But let's take a second to look at the console. There's quite a few options here, and it can be a little overwhelming, so just ignore most of it. The help text will help you out, but for now, let's just generate a bundle. So we'll do PHP app console, generate bundle. And we're going to call it tutorial / to-do bundle. Normally you'd use a / as a namespace delimiter, but apparently there's some issues with that, and they recommend using the / here. So it'll be the tutorial to-do bundle, and the target directory will be, the default is fine. Configuration format, there's a couple different options: YAML, XML, PHP, or annotation. I prefer annotation because it keeps everything in line and I don't have to jump between a bunch of files to see what's going on, so let's use that. Do we want to generate the whole structure? No, we'll do our own thing. And then we'll confirm generation, allow it to update our kernel and our routing. And it says now we can start using the generated code. So let's look for a second at what that accomplished. If we look in our app kernel that I just closed, we can see that it added our tutorial to-do bundle here. So it'll automatically load that up for us. And then in routing YAML, it's now loading all of our controllers in the bundle as annotation controllers. So we can see in source tutorial bundle, and then under controllers, we have a default controller. The route is hello and then a placeholder for name. So if you want to check that out, you can just go to app hello, and I've already done this. So you can see hello/world is hello world, hello everyone, hello everyone, and it's just simple, right? It's very simple. So to extend that, we want to create an entity, and an entity is a way for Symfony to communicate with the database through an object relational mapping to say this object in PHP code relates to this row in our database. So let's look at the console again. And Doctrine is the ORM that I prefer. There's a couple different. Propel, I think, is also a big one. But I like Doctrine because that's what I started with. That's what I know. So you can get familiar with that too. So we're going to go Doctrine, generate entity. And all of those are, of course, separated by colons. The entity shortcut name, we have tutorial to-do bundle, to-do. Again, I like annotation format, so we'll go with that. Now it wants to give us some fields. It's given us a default primary key named ID. Now we can add as many extra fields as we want. So let's add a name field for the name of our to-do, or what our to-do is. And it's a string, and we'll leave it with 255 characters. We'll give it a created at. We're going to call that a date time. We'll give it a completed at, also a date time. We'll give it a completed field, which is a Boolean to tell us yes, this is completed, or no, it's not. And I think that will do us. So we'll hit enter again. Let's, for the sake of it, generate an empty repository class, and I'll go over that in a minute. Confirm the configuration, and we can start using it. So let's check it out. Down here in our tutorial to-do bundle, we now have a new directory called entity with a to-do in it. And you can see it's a Doctrine entity, and it has all these fields that we specified in the creator, in the setup wizard, and then getters and setters for all of them, which is awesome. So I want to change one thing. Our completed field is a Boolean. So instead of get completed, let's just call that is completed, right? Because it's an isr, makes sense for yes or no values. Another thing that I want to change is for our completed at value, we'll always have a created at. Oh, and it looks like I spelled that wrong. So we're going to have to correct that typo. So we'll do it both in the property, in the annotation telling the database how to handle that property, and then a getter and setter. We'll just correct the typo. Simple process. It takes some time if there's a lot of getters and setters, and so having a wizard is really nice. There will always be a created at date. As soon as the to-do is created, it's going to be populated and say I was made at this time. The completed at, though, can be nullable, and that just means that there doesn't have to be a value in there. So let's go back here and we'll do app console. And actually what I'm going to do, and I can't vouch for this in a production environment, but to save a few keystrokes in development, I am going to change the mode of my app console file to 777, or read, write, execute for everyone. Now instead of PHP app console, I can just do /app console and then check out our commands. You can see that it's been a while for me, but it's a good refresher. I mean, it's really easy to figure out what everything is doing from the names and the descriptions. So what we want to do is now create our schema. We have our entity, and we want to be able to put it in the database. So we're going to go app console, doctrine, schema, create. And it says it's done that successfully. Now that we have our entity in the database, we want to be able to do something with it. So let's generate a CRUD, and a CRUD is a create, read, update, and delete. and it's really basic scaffolding. So we'll do Doctrine generate CRUD. And it's going to ask us what entity do you want to create your CRUD for. So it's tutorial to do bundle, to do. Do you want it to generate the right actions? For the sake of this example, we'll say yes. We want it to be able to create, new, update, and delete to be able to add new to-dos, right? And then we'll leave it with annotation for the controller. The route prefixes are quote-unquote mounted under the prefix that you give it. We'll just leave it with /to-do, confirm generation, and hop over. The code that it's given us is a new controller called to-do controller. And it just has all of the read, write, edit, delete, everything you would expect from a CRUD scaffold is created automatically. Some of the ways that they're doing it are not necessarily the way that I would do it, but since it's free time, basically, I go with it. And you have the annotations. Here it's under the create with the method post and is using this template. Let's hop over into our browser and go to our website /to-do, where it's mounted everything. So we can see there's not really any styling or anything. It's really kind of ugly, but we can create a new entry. And we're going to say walk the dog and create it at, I don't know why that's defaulting to 2007. We'll fix that later, but this isn't completed right yet, so we'll create it. Oh, our completed is not nullable, which means that we have to complete it. That's really kind of funny. Very funny. All right, we'll fix that as well in a second. But you can see this is the to-do that we've created. This looks like a bug to me in the scaffolding, but if we have a null date, it's giving it our right now date. And I can refresh it and you can see that it's changing. But it doesn't really affect our code one way or the other. We'll go back to the list. We can see that it's there. We can see that it says that it's completed. But what we want to make sure that we're doing is that when an item is completed, we mark the completed at date gets set. And also when the item gets created, the created at date gets set. So we are going to use something called a lifecycle callback. And this is a Doctrine thing. So we'll come down here to our very bottom, and we're going to make a public function pre-persist. And we will add an annotation saying ORM, and I don't remember the exact semantics. I think it's ORM / pre-persist. We have to tell our entity that it has lifecycle callbacks so that it knows to look for those. And I think, again, that's has lifecycle callbacks. Probably uppercased, like everything else. Let me check the documentation really quickly, and I'll be right back with you. So I checked the documentation. That's another thing that has grown in leaps and bounds, is the documentation. So it says Doctrine, lifecycle callbacks, has lifecycle callbacks was correct. It has a set of parentheses at the end, which I believe are optional, but let's just add them for kicks and giggles. And lifecycle is all one word. Perfect. So pre-persist will happen right before it's added to the database for the very first time. So we're going to say this created at equals new date time. We're also going to add another one called pre-update. So public function pre-update, add the annotation. And what we want to do with this one is make sure that if our to-do is completed, that the completed at date gets populated also. So we'll say if this dot, or this arrow, I guess, is completed. And normally, or what we want to do is say this completed at equals new datetime. Now, there's a flaw in the logic here because every time this is updated, this check will run. And so let's say you complete it once, it'll say, oh, it's completed, mark it updated. And then let's say you edit the name or something like that, you come back again, it'll say, oh, it's completed, mark it with a new updated time. So what we want to do is say if this is completed and this completed at is null, then give it a new datetime. So let's go back over to our browser. Looks like nothing blew up. That's good. So we're going to call it buy milk. And we need to figure that out, but it's buy milk. Something went wrong. Give me just a moment. Let's figure out what happened. Let's go check out our entity. Look at what happened. Okay, it looks like what the problem is I forgot an extra asterisk in these annotations to set it apart between a doc block annotation and just the multi-line comment. So let's go back and try that again. We'll create buy flowers. If you have someone nice to buy flowers for, do it. Create that. And our created at is working great. It's now set to the time that it was created. And it looks like our completed at, yeah, it looks like persist and update don't both fire. So we're going to want to make sure to call this pre-update just as a kind of workaround to make sure that this logic happens if the task is completed at the same time it's created. And then that should work it for us. Another one, wash the car. I'm always forgetting to do that. And yeah, perfect. Created at and completed at are now the same. So let's go back and take a look at what we've done. We created a new entity. We gave it some fields that are now mapped to the database with the Doctrine ORM. We created some lifecycle callbacks. So this will be called before the object is saved for the first time, and this will be called every subsequent time. Then we have a controller that was generated by Doctrine for us that maps all of these methods or HTTP actions, I guess, to controller actions. Let's look at our form. We have a to-do type. And I'm suspecting that our problem is somewhere in here with having to mark completed as true before we can save the form. So let's go ahead. We'll call this a checkbox. And then we'll pass it an array of options. And we're going to say required is false. Now let's go to our browser and oops, try that out. We'll go back to the list, create a new entry, and then I'm running out of things to do here. Let's buy Oreos. I mean, what else goes with your milk? Let's try to create it. Oh, perfect. We have a completed at. Oh, it's null. You can see because it's updating every time. Like I said, I think that's a bug. If you're interested in my guess as to the code behind it, it's creating a date time for the field, and since there's no value to pass into it, it's just creating a date time of now. But that doesn't really matter to us. That will go away as we build on top of our scaffolding. So that worked great. So let's edit it. We'll mark it completed. Bingo, populates with our current time. Back to the list, we can see that now. I think that's a pretty good start. We created an entity, we created a controller, we modified the form a little bit to behave how we thought that it should, and we cleaned up some of the default stuff. I'm going to actually push this up to GitHub, and I'll post the GitHub repository in the comments, and I'm going to tag it as we go along with each of the episodes. Now that life has settled down a little bit, I can promise that it won't be 9 months before the next episode, and so you should check that out soon. Thanks, guys.